The room erupted in applause while my hands went numb. My boss stood at the front of the conference room, smiling like a savior, clicking through slides I had memorized in my sleep. When he landed on the final slide, the revenue strategy, the words came out of his mouth exactly the way I'd written them. Same phrasing, same emphasis, same conclusion. I realized last night, he said casually, that this was the only way to save the quarter. I felt my jaw tighten, because I'd realized it 6 months ago. No one looked at me. No one questioned it. The quarter was saved, and my work had just been erased in real time. I watched him accept handshakes from executives who'd ignored my emails for months. The CFO clapped him on the shoulder. The VP of Operations nodded with approval. My boss, Marcus, basked in it all like he'd single-handedly pulled the company back from the edge. And maybe, to them, he had. Because my name wasn't on those slides. My analysis wasn't credited. The hundreds of hours I'd poured into that proposal had vanished into his presentation like they'd never existed. Smiled. Polite one. Controlled. The kind women learn early to keep their jobs and avoid being called difficult or emotional, or any of the other words that end careers quietly. Inside something cracked. Not loudly but permanently. Like ice on a frozen lake when the temperature shifts just enough. When the meeting ended, people congratulated him. Someone slapped his back. Another executive said, "Brilliant thinking, Marcus. You saved us." He laughed, modest and confident at the same time, the way people do when they're used to being believed. I gathered my notebook slowly, like if I moved too fast, I might say something I couldn't take back. My fingers felt cold. My chest felt tight. But my face stayed neutral, pleasant, professional. He didn't look at me once. Not when he accepted praise. Not when he shook hands. Not when he walked past my seat on his way out of the conference room. It was like I wasn't there. Like I'd never been there. And maybe that was the point. That was the moment my boss used my proposal to save the quarter. And that was the moment I realized he thought I'd let him get away with it. At the time, I didn't know that ending yet. I didn't know about the folder I'd create, the timestamps that would save me, or the audit that would unravel everything he'd built on stolen work. All I knew was that something fundamental had shifted. For 9 years, I'd believed that good work spoke for itself, that loyalty mattered, that being excellent meant being recognized. But watching Marcus claim my strategy as his sudden late-night revelation taught me something brutal and clarifying. In places like this, silence wasn't humility. It was permission. And I'd just given him permission to erase me. Not anymore. My name is Cynthia Warren. I had been with the company for 9 years. I wasn't loud. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't the type to demand attention or fight for credit. I was the person executives called when numbers were bleeding and timelines were impossible. When projects were failing and no one knew why. When strategies needed saving and everyone else had given up. I built that proposal line by line. Every projection. Every revenue model. Every contingency plan for markets that hadn't shifted yet but would. And Marcus knew it. He'd approved every draft. He'd sent me back to revise sections he didn't understand. He'd asked me to explain the methodology 3 separate times until he could repeat it back without sounding confused. He knew exactly whose work this was. He just didn't think it mattered. Or maybe he thought I'd be grateful. Grateful that my ideas were being used. Grateful to stay in the background while he took the spotlight. Grateful to keep my job instead of demanding my credit. That strategy cost me weekends. Sleep. Missed birthdays. My partner had stopped asking when I'd be home because the answer was always the same. Sleep. Or not at all. I tested the proposal. Stress tested it against worst-case scenarios. Rewritten it at midnight when new data came in that changed projections by 2% and I couldn't let it go out wrong. I'd lived inside those numbers for 6 months, thinking about market trends while brushing my teeth, dreaming about revenue models, waking up at 3 in the morning with sudden clarity about risk mitigation. Marcus had approved every version with a thumbs-up email and one sentence. Looks good. Proceed. Never detailed feedback. Never substantive questions. Just permission to keep working, keep fixing, to keep building the thing he'd eventually claim as his own. I didn't know those emails would save me later. I didn't know I'd need them, but I kept them all anyway because I kept everything. It was a habit, maybe paranoia, maybe survival instinct. He stopped me in the hallway the day after the presentation. "Great teamwork today," he said, his voice casual, friendly even, like we were colleagues instead of what we actually were. Someone who did the work and someone who took credit for it. "You handled it professionally." Professionally. The word sat between us like a threat wrapped in a compliment. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, almost like he was doing me a favor by warning me. "Now that the emergency's over, leadership's reassessing roles. Making sure everyone's positioned for maximum impact going forward." That was the first threat. Not explicit. Not actionable. Just a quiet reminder that my position wasn't guaranteed. That I should be grateful for what I had. That I shouldn't ask questions or demand recognition or do anything that might make things uncomfortable. He nodded. Smiled. I said something about looking forward to contributing to the team's success. And I walked away knowing exactly what he meant. Shut up. Stay quiet. Be grateful. Or disappear. My calendar invites started disappearing within a week. Meetings I'd been leading for months suddenly had new owners. Strategy sessions I'd initiated were now handled by other departments. Decisions I used to make were being made without me in rooms I wasn't invited to anymore. I wasn't fired. That would have been too obvious, too actionable, too easy to point to and say this is wrong. Instead, I was being erased. Slowly, carefully. One meeting at a time. One decision at a time. One responsibility removed and reassigned until my role became hollow. Decorative. Meaningless. People stopped asking my opinion. Emails I sent got shorter responses or no responses at all. Projects I'd started moved forward without me. And no one seemed to notice or care that the person who designed them wasn't in the room anymore. It was surgical. Methodical. The kind of thing that happens so gradually you almost don't notice until you're completely invisible. Almost. Marcus got invited to meetings I wasn't CC'd on. Meetings with senior leadership. With investors. With board members. He referenced his strategy publicly, again and again, in presentations and reports and casual hallway conversations with people who mattered. Every time I said nothing. Every time he got bolder. Started adding details he hadn't known 6 months ago. Started speaking with the confidence of someone who'd originated the ideas instead of just approved them. Started believing his own story, maybe. Or maybe he'd always believed it. Maybe to him, approving my work and presenting my work were the same thing. Maybe he genuinely thought his role as my manager meant my ideas belonged to him. That my labor was his to claim. That credit flowed upward automatically. And I should have understood that from the beginning. I watched him rise. Watched his reputation grow. Watched people treat him like a visionary while I became a footnote. Then not even that. Just gone. A junior analyst congratulated him in the break room one afternoon. I was getting coffee, trying to look busy, trying to be invisible. She was young, eager, excited to be working on a winning team. "That plan you came up with saved us," she said. "Coming up with that under pressure. That's incredible." He smiled. Modest. Just doing what needed to be done. I thanked her for her work, my voice steady and pleasant, and excused myself to the restroom. I locked the door and stared at myself in the mirror until my breathing slowed. My reflection looked tired. Older than it should. There were lines around my eyes I didn't remember seeing before. Hope is dangerous in places like that. Hope makes you wait for fairness that never comes. Hope makes you believe that truth matters more than power. Hope keeps you quiet while you're being erased. I couldn't afford hope anymore. I needed something else. Something harder. Something that wouldn't disappear when someone decided I was inconvenient. I didn't confront him. Confrontation would have been pointless. He would have denied it or minimized it or turned it around somehow to make me the problem. The one who couldn't handle feedback. The one who wasn't a team player. The one who didn't understand how leadership worked. Instead, I went home that night, opened my laptop at my kitchen table, and created a folder. I labeled it carefully, precisely the way I labeled everything. Q3 proposal. Source material. Then I started pulling files. Every draft I'd ever sent him. Every revision. Every email where I explained methodology or answered his questions or walked him through sections he didn't understand. Every timestamp showing when documents were created and by whom. I worked methodically, carefully, without emotion. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was documentation. This was evidence. This was insurance. I backed everything up in 3 separate locations. Cloud storage. External drive. Email to an account he didn't know existed. Then I closed my laptop and slept better than I had in weeks. The receipts were perfect. Drafts showing the evolution of ideas. Timestamps proving I'd written every word months before his presentation. Tracked changes showing my name as the author and editor on every single version. Emails showing me explaining concepts to him in simple terms because he'd asked for clarification. Meeting notes where I'd outlined strategies he later claimed as sudden revelations. My name was everywhere. In metadata. In document properties. In comment threads and revision histories. His name appeared exactly twice. Once when he forwarded my draft to himself. Once when he approved the final version with his standard 1-sentence email. Looks good. Proceed. That was it. That was his entire contribution to the strategy that saved the quarter. Permission. Not creation. Not innovation. Not late-night breakthroughs. Just the authority to say yes to someone else's work and then pretend it was his. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the evidence assembled on my screen. For the first time since that conference room meeting, I felt something other than rage or despair. Felt control. The document history told a story no one could argue with. Every file had metadata. Every revision had a creator. Every change had a timestamp. Technology doesn't lie. It doesn't care about authority or charm or who tells the better story. Just records facts. Created by Cynthia Warren. Modified by Cynthia Warren. Edited by Cynthia Warren. Over and over, in document after document, my name appeared as the sole author of the strategy Marcus had presented as his own. His name appeared once at the end. Final approval. Not creation. Not contribution. Just permission to use something someone else had built. I saved everything to a compressed folder, encrypted it, and labeled it with a date I wouldn't forget. Then I waited. Because the thing about people who steal credit is they don't stop at once. They can't. The first lie was too easy. The reward too sweet. They always come back for more. And when they do, that's when the truth becomes most valuable. I just had to be patient. Marcus presented the strategy again 3 weeks later. This time to finance. Same slides. Same language. Same confident delivery as if he'd spent months developing these ideas instead of approving someone else's work and taking credit. Different audience, though. The finance team was analytical. Detail-oriented. They asked questions that required understanding, not just memorization. They wanted to know methodology. They wanted to see underlying assumptions. They wanted to understand the model at a level that required having actually built it. I watched from the back of the room where I'd been invited at the last minute, probably because someone realized the presentation involved financial projections and I was the one who'd created them. Marcus handled the first few questions fine. He'd memorized enough of my explanations to sound knowledgeable. But then someone asked about risk calculations, and I saw him hesitate. Just for a second. Just long enough for doubt to enter the room. The question came from Thomas, Finance's senior analyst. He was precise, methodical, the kind of person who trusted numbers more than people. Who originated this model? He asked, not accusatory, just curious. Like he wanted to understand the source so he could evaluate its reliability. Marcus answered too quickly. I did. No hesitation. No acknowledgement of team contribution. No credit shared. Just a flat claim of sole authorship. I watched 3 people exchange glances. Subtle, quick, but unmistakable. Thomas tilted his head slightly, the way he did when numbers didn't match up. When did you build the baseline projections? Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his notes. Late last year, he said. December, I think. Thomas nodded slowly. Interesting. Because the metadata shows these files were created in March. 6 months before your presentation. The room went very quiet. Marcus laughed. Forced. Must be a versioning issue. You know how shared drives are. But Thomas wasn't laughing. Neither was anyone else. They were looking at him differently now. Like they were seeing something they hadn't noticed before. Later that afternoon, Marcus cornered me near my desk. His voice was low, almost gentle, the way people sound when they're trying to rewrite reality. You're being sensitive about this, he said. This is how leadership works. Ideas move up. That's the structure. That's how organizations function. He leaned against the edge of my desk like we were having a friendly conversation. You did great work on that proposal. No one's saying you didn't. But presenting to senior leadership, taking ownership of strategy, that's my role. That's what I'm here for. I nodded like I believed him. Like his explanation made sense. Like this was reasonable instead of theft dressed up as hierarchy. I understand, I said. Neutral. Professional. Giving nothing away. Good, he said, relieved. I knew you'd get it. You're too smart not to understand how this works. He walked away thinking he'd smoothed things over. Thinking he'd managed me successfully. Thinking I was smart enough to understand that fighting back would only hurt me. He was right about one thing. I was smart. Just not in the way he thought. An internal review was announced 2 weeks later. Routine, they said. Standard procedure following major strategic initiatives. Just checking processes and documentation. Making sure everything was properly recorded for future reference. Marcus's laugh when he heard about it was forced. He tried to play it off as bureaucratic nonsense, unnecessary oversight, the kind of thing that slowed down effective leadership. But I saw the tension in his shoulders. Saw him checking his email more frequently. Saw him closing his laptop when people walked past his office. Mine was silent. Not on the outside. On the outside, I did exactly what was expected. I prepared materials. I responded to requests. I maintained my professional facade. But inside I felt something close to peace. Because I knew what they'd find when they started digging. I knew what the files would show. I knew what the timestamps would prove. And I knew Marcus had no idea what was coming. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning. Simple. Professional. No hint of accusation. Please submit supporting materials related to the Q3 strategy proposal. Include all drafts, correspondence, and documentation showing development timeline. I read it 3 times. Then I opened the folder I'd created weeks ago. The one with every draft, every email, every track change, every piece of evidence showing exactly who'd created the strategy Marcus had claimed as his own. I attached one compressed file. No explanation. No commentary. No accusations. Just documentation. Raw data. Facts that spoke for themselves. I hit send and felt my heart rate slow for the first time in weeks. This wasn't revenge. This was truth. This was letting the record speak. This was stepping back and allowing reality to assert itself without my hands on it. I didn't have to accuse Marcus of anything. The files would do that for me. The timestamps would tell the story. The metadata would reveal what he'd tried to hide. I just had to provide the evidence and let people draw their own conclusions. Marcus called me that night. Once at 7. Then again at 8. Then a third time at 9:30. I let every call go to voicemail. The first message was casual. Hey, just wanted to touch base about the documentation request. Let me know if you need any guidance on what to submit. The second was less casual. I think there might be some confusion about the Q3 materials. We should probably coordinate our submissions. Call me back. The third was nearly desperate. We need to talk about clarifying some misunderstandings before this gets out of hand. There's obviously been some miscommunication about roles and contributions. I can explain everything if you just call me back. I deleted all 3 messages without responding, because there was nothing to clarify. No misunderstanding to correct. No explanation that would change what the evidence showed. He'd stolen my work. He'd claimed my strategy as his own. He'd tried to erase me. And now the truth was in front of people who had the power to do something about it. I didn't owe him a warning. I didn't owe him a chance to spin the story. I owed him exactly what he'd given me. Nothing. The audit meeting happened on a Friday. I was called in to present my materials. The room held 5 people. The head of HR, the CFO, Thomas from finance, the VP of operations, and Marcus. He looked tired. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked like fear wrapped in false casualness. No one spoke while documents loaded on the screen. File after file. Draft after draft. My name in the author field. My edits in the track changes. My explanations in email threads. The timeline was undeniable. March through August I'd built the proposal. September Marcus had presented it as his own. The silence felt familiar. Like the silence in that conference room when he'd claimed my work. This time though it wasn't mine. This time, the silence belonged to people watching someone's lies collapse in real time. I sat with my hands folded. Professional. Waiting. I didn't need to say anything. The evidence was speaking louder than I ever could. Marcus tried to explain the timeline. I was involved in the strategic direction from the beginning, he said. The execution was collaborative, but the core vision was mine. The timestamps disagreed. They showed him receiving complete drafts, not contributing to them. They showed him asking for explanations, not providing direction. They showed him approving work, not creating it. He tried to explain authorship. These tools don't always accurately capture contributions. Lots of this was developed in meetings, in conversations. That doesn't show up in metadata. The drafts contradicted him. Version 1 created by me in March. Version 2 revised by me in April. Version 15 still authored solely by me in July. His name appeared nowhere except the final approval email. Thomas spoke quietly. Can you explain the risk calculations? The ones you presented to us last month. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. I'd need to review my notes. Cynthia, Thomas said, turning to me. Can you explain them? Could. In detail. Without notes. 'Cause I'd built them. The room watched him realize what they already knew. They found other projects after that. The audit expanded. They pulled files from the previous year. From the year before that. They found other proposals. Other strategies. Other people's work that had disappeared into Marcus's presentations with their names erased and his stamped on top. 3 former employees were contacted. People who'd left quietly, professionally, without making accusations or demanding credit. People who'd walked away rather than fight. People like I'd almost become. Each of them had similar stories. Work claimed. Credit stolen. Contributions erased. They provided their own documentation. Their own evidence. Their own proof that Marcus had built his reputation on other people's expertise while making sure those people stayed invisible, quiet, and grateful for whatever scraps of recognition he chose to offer. His authority began to rot from the inside. Every strategy he'd presented was questioned. Every project he'd led was examined. Every success he'd claimed was traced back to its actual source. And almost none of them were actually his. He'd been a middleman pretending to be a creator. An approver pretending to be an innovator. He looked at me during a break in one of the later meetings. The kind of look that was meant to communicate betrayal. Like I'd broken some unspoken rule. Like I'd violated a trust instead of just refusing to let him keep stealing. Like I was the villain in this story instead of the person who'd finally said enough. I held his gaze. I didn't look away. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt clear. Certain. Done with being erased. His expression shifted. From accusation to something closer to understanding. Or maybe just acceptance. Maybe he finally realized that silence wasn't the same as permission. That letting him get away with it once didn't mean I'd let him do it forever. That there were limits to what people would tolerate, even in places that rewarded stealing credit and punished speaking truth. He looked away first. That felt important somehow. Not because I'd won some staring contest. But because for 9 years I'd been the one who looked away. The one who stayed quiet. The one who accepted less than I deserved. Not anymore. Marcus was removed from the Q3 project first. Conflict of interest, they called it. Then he was removed from his management role. Restructuring, they explained. Then he was removed from the building. No announcement. No company-wide email. No farewell party. Just a badge that stopped working one Monday morning and a desk that was empty by Tuesday. People asked what happened. HR gave vague answers about pursuing new opportunities and organizational changes. Most people understood what that meant. The ones who'd worked with him closely understood even better. They'd seen the audit. They'd heard the questions. They'd watched the evidence pile up until there was no explanation left except the truth. He'd built his career on stolen work. And eventually that foundation had to collapse. I heard he landed somewhere else eventually. Smaller company. Lower title. No direct reports. I didn't follow up. I didn't need to know. His story wasn't my concern anymore. Mine was. Leadership apologized. Formally. Specifically. Not with vague corporate language about misunderstandings or communication gaps. They acknowledged what had happened. They admitted their systems had failed. They recognized that I'd been erased and that my work had been stolen and that they'd let it happen because it was easier than questioning someone in authority. They offered me Marcus's position. Redefined, they said. With clear authority. With explicit credit protocols. With assurances that what happened to me wouldn't happen again. I didn't answer immediately. Could have said yes right there. Could have jumped at the promotion, the raise, the validation after 9 years of invisibility. But I'd learned something watching Marcus fall. Desperation makes you accept things you shouldn't. And I wasn't desperate anymore. I had leverage. I had proof of my value. Had options. So I waited. Thought. I made a list of what I wanted and what I wouldn't accept. And then I made them an offer instead of accepting theirs. I accepted on my terms. Not the job they offered but the one I designed. Director of Strategic Development. Not reporting to someone who could erase me again, but directly to the CFO. With a team I'd built. With my name on everything I created. With credit that couldn't be stolen and authority that couldn't be undermined. They agreed. Because they knew what I'd proven. That I could see around corners. That I could build strategies that saved companies. That I was the person they should have recognized 9 years ago. I took Marcus's old office. I didn't keep any of his things. I didn't want reminders. I started fresh. Built new systems. Hired people I could trust. Created work I was proud of with my name attached. I never contacted Marcus again. He never contacted me. And the quarter he'd saved with my stolen proposal. It became the foundation of the career he lost and the one I finally built without asking permission. Without staying quiet. Without disappearing. I'd learned the most valuable lesson of my professional life. Silence isn't humility. Documentation isn't paranoia. And sometimes the only way to be seen is to stop letting people look through you.